The second generation Kia Soul is a much improved proposition, as it needed to be to avoid being left behind in a growing market sector for small crossover models that's now stuffed with increasingly talented rivals. In becoming a little bigger and much better finished, with better refinement, extra equipment and the option of a clever all-electric EV model, Kia has thrown down the gauntlet to the market leaders in this segment. Here's yet another way towards a trendier take on super mini motoring. If one car could be said to have started the design-led revolution which has completely transformed the way that people see Kia, it was the original version of this model, the Soul. Fresh, funky, original and bold, it was launched back in 2008 to demonstrate that Kia really could design and engineer cars that were out of the ordinary. Cars that were more than merely a means of getting from A to B. Cars, if you like, with soul. Today, the motor industry is constantly bringing us super mini-based crossover contenders, copying the market segment Kia pioneered with this model. That of the go-anywhere SUV lifestyle look, packaged into a small, light but versatile two-wheel drive urban runabout. The company's Californian design studio created the concept to appeal to US college students, and the brand hoped the same approach would open up a younger demographic here in Europe too. It didn't. As it turned out, the majority of buyers of the first generation model were more likely to be collecting pensions than college degrees. A rethink was needed then, and it brought us this much improved second generation version in the spring of 2014. Kia knew this Mark II design would face much tougher competition than its predecessor, so would need more universal appeal. But at the same time, the company was reluctant to lose the Marmite love it or hate it feel that with the original model did so much to change the way people thought about the brand. Eventually, the development team settled on the car we're going to look at here, retaining much of the previous look and feel, but building on it in the creation of a car that's a touch larger, a little more practical, and a lot better finished inside. They've developed the dynamics too. Here we're promised a more involving and much quieter drive, even though the 1.6 litre petrol and diesel engines on offer are a little different from those available before. Partly that's because much of the second generation model's development budget was devoted to the inclusion of an all-electric EV version in the lineup, Kia's first. It's another example of the kind of leadership in this segment the brand wants to maintain, at least in terms of technology. For greater sales, though, more conventional versions of this Soul will need to appeal to the fashionable single folk and small families being targeted by this class of car. So, will these people take to it? Let's find out. There aren't many small crossover models that actually bother to match 4x4 looks with 4x4 capability, and this isn't one of them. So despite the SUV overtones that Kia hopes you'll see in this car's upright stance, commanding driving position and higher than average ride height, it'll be no more use in the next snowy snap than the Fiesta-style Super Mini you might currently be driving. Whether it'll be as good to drive as that kind of car, though, is quite another question. In truth, the original Soul model wasn't really, but here, quite a lot of work's gone into polishing up the driving dynamics. As a result, these are, by and large, much improved. The car itself is still set up to be quite stiff, both to limit body roll from that high-sided shape, and also because Kia thinks its young at heart audience will want it like that. I'm not so sure. Throw this Soul determinedly through a few twisties and there is a touch more body roll than a well-developed conventional Super Mini would exhibit. But it's now really not that noticeable unless you're really pushing on. Should that be the case, then you probably won't appreciate the rather light electrically assisted steering. This, though, is an issue your Kia salesperson will tell you that the brand has thought ahead to correct. But perhaps I should clarify that. Kia hasn't corrected the problem, they provided the means for you to do so at the wheel. Their solution is a so-called flex steer system. You operate via a button here on the steering wheel that allows you to vary steering weight between comfort, normal and sport modes. Now the problem with this setup is, as in Kia's Ceed family hatch, that since the comfort setting is excessively light and the sport mode artificially heavy, you end up leaving it in normal all the time, which rather defeats the point and leaves you with the same overlight steering the flex steer setup was supposed to give you the tools to correct. As I've said before, with these kinds of setups, I know electric steering is difficult to get right, but it'd be better next time for the engineers to simply develop one system that's direct and incisive. Where you'd think that light steering would be welcome would be around town, and sure enough, this Soul continues to be an easy partner for city centre motoring. The fact that the body's 29% stiffer than before has freed up the springs to be a touch more compliant this time around, so urban potholed surfaces don't feel quite as jiggly as they did in the original model. The tight turning circle is also welcome here, as is the generally good all-round visibility that's now aided at junctions by these narrower front A-pillars. The thick rear C-pillars can, though, still sometimes be a problem when reversing, though the flat back end helps a lot when you're trying to edge back into tight spaces, and a full park assist system's now optional to do the steering bit for you. And on the highway? Well, the first thing that those familiar with the original model will notice is just how quiet this car can now be. This is no accident, of course. A huge amount of development effort having gone into NVH. That's noise, vibration and harshness countermeasures, with work on the engines, the suspension, the aerodynamics, all complementing the extra insulation you'll find everywhere, from under the carpets to within the A and B pillars and behind the dashboard, where you minded to take this car apart. Kia claims that noise levels have, as a result, fallen by 3 decibels. But, of course, the ultimate level of refinement you get will depend a lot on the engine you choose beneath the bonnet. If indeed you choose an engine. There is, after all, now a fully electric EV battery-powered version, development of which left the Korean development team no remaining time or budget to do very much with the 1.6-litre petrol or diesel power plants used in the first generation version of this car. So these are pretty much as before, offering buyers a choice of either a 130 brake horsepower GDI petrol unit or a 126 brake horsepower CRDI diesel. Both units able to reach 62 miles an hour in around 10.5 seconds en route to around 115 miles an hour. The petrol engine was uprated halfway through the production life of the Mark I Soul model to offer a bit more torque and power. But of course it's still no match for the diesel in that regard, and still has to be revved to nearly 5,000 RPM before you get all it has to offer. Diesel customers also get the option of a rather inefficient 6-speed automatic gearbox. It's best though, unless you really are city-bound, to stick with the reasonably slick manual 6-speeder, operable with a glossy lever borrowed from Kia's Proceed GT hot hatch. That's not an option, of course, if you go for the all-electric EV variant I mentioned earlier. Full battery-driven models of this kind always, of course, being automatics. This one gets a 27 kilowatt battery with a claimed 80 to 100 mile driving range that might, for once in this case, be actually realistic, thanks to the efforts the engineers have here put into maximising the charge regeneration that's possible under braking and on throttle liftoff. You'll operate this car with or without its eco mode switched on. It'll be switched on if you want to maximise battery range, or off if you prioritise performance that can see the rest of 62 mile an hour sprint accomplished in less than 12 seconds en route to around 90 miles an hour. Whichever setting you choose, you've the option of using it in either drive or brakes mode. The brakes setting will further emphasise the harvesting of regenerational energy and maximise the range you can travel before charging is once again necessary. When it is time to plug in, that process will occupy around about 5 hours from a domestic socket, though if you're fortunate enough to find or have regular access to a rapid charger, then that'll juice a flat battery to 80% capacity in around 25 minutes. Looks can be deceptive. If you're at all familiar with the first generation version of this car, then a casual glance at this Mark II model might initially leave you thinking that very little had changed. After all, as before, there's a tall, almost military-style square-cut stance with a high bonnet, a vertical rear hatch and bulging wheel arches. And as before, the whole thing has been simmered in Kia's US Californian design studio to give it a bit of surf shack attitude. Peer a little closer though, and you'll find that much is different. Attitude, in fact, is now the right word to use in relation to this car. The rather apologetic funkiness of the original version is here replaced with a sportier, tougher, more confident look that's 20mm longer, 15mm wider and 10mm lower. The soul has come of age. In fact, it's grown up in more ways than one. The earliest versions of this Kia were based on the brand's Rio Super Mini. This car, in contrast, sits on the underpinnings of the company's larger Seed Focus-sized family hatch. That's not enough to elevate this soul beyond the ranks of Nissan Juke-sized Super Mini crossover models and into contention with larger Qashqai Class 1s. But then it doesn't need to be, for the brand has its strong-selling Sportage model to compete in that segment. What the Seed stuff does, though, is to give this design a bit more space to breathe, to express itself. Specifically, that means a sharper edge to the front of the bonnet and much more purposeful penmanship in terms of the lower grille opening, the bumper, the fog lights and the wheel arches. There's even a plastic vent-style panel just behind the front wheel that's supposed to remind you of a Range Rover Sport. As a result, such visual claims of go-anywhere SUV-ness are now that bit more believable, even if the hardware is still absent to make them a reality. Chief designer Tom Kearns says the bit he's happiest with is the more pronounced backpack shape of the tailgate, with its seamlessly integrated tail lamp units. Along with the reclined roof and sturdy C-pillars, these also play their part in creating this Kia's tougher, more robust appearance. A look, these days, founded upon proper family-sized practicality. Take this boot, now easier to get to thanks to a tailgate opening that's 62mm wider. The cargo area's nearly 25% bigger now once you push forward the split-folding rear bench, with 994 litres available if you load to the cargo cover and 1,367 litres on offer if you stack your stuff up to the roof. These are totals that most small crossover rivals now struggle to match. Potentially you're talking nearly 3 times as much space as you get in a similarly configured Nissan Juke, for example. Even if you need the back seat, you still get 354 litres, with further partitioned room available beneath the floor. That's significantly more space than you get in a Ford Focus. There's also the option of a dual-height boot floor. Talking of extra room, the 20mm wheelbase increase suggests that the back seat might be a little more usable this time round. It is. Older buyers trendy enough to embrace the bad boy styling will like the high-set seats and wide opening doors. Maturing families, meanwhile, will find that extra knee and leg space and the lower central transmission tunnel should, at a pinch, enable 3 burly teenagers to be more easily accommodated on this rear bench without too much grousing, especially given the generous headroom conferred by the distinctive high roof and square tail. Ultimately, though, the happiest occupants back here will, as before, be a trio of kids. And at the wheel, well, it's certainly an improvement from the brittle, plasticky atmosphere of the original version, though you might still have hoped Kia's design team to have gone a bit further in view of the standards set by rivals. Never mind, you'll certainly perceive this to be a more expensive car than before, thanks to a better choice of materials and this larger 8-inch central infotainment screen that's fitted to all variants save the entry-level model. There are soft touch facings on the instrument panel, the centre console and the doors, plus extra touches of high gloss and leather on most models. Plush variants like this one even feature LED red mood lighting in the front speaker grills. Lovely. There's plenty of storage space too, with decently sized door storage bins, a properly deep central compartment, plenty of cup holders and a reasonably sized glove box. As promised, it does feel a little more spacious here than it did before. Narrower A-pillars help, as do greater levels of head and shoulder room. I also like the circular theme to be found not only in the deeply recessed gauges of the instruments and the side door panels, but also in the neat round fingertip controls that you'll find on the 3-spoke steering wheel. These buttons enable you to access most of the functionality you'll need without taking your hands from the helm. But additional items still fall easily to hand thanks to the way that the redesigned fascia has been sculpted to bring the relocated controls closer to the driver. List prices suggest that you'll typically pay somewhere from just under £13,000 to just over £21,000 for this car, but you'll need to put that into perspective. After all, unusually for a Super Mini-based crossover, the engines are quite large, with nothing less than 1.6 litres in size, so make sure you take that into account when comparing the Soul to apparently cheaper rivals. There's a price-leading petrol-powered Start variant at the foot of the range, but that's really just there to offer up an eye-catching entry-level price. The lineup really begins in earnest at Connect level, which is the first point at which you've the option to pay the £1,600 premium over the petrol variant and get yourself the preferable CRDI diesel engine that around 70% of Soul customers choose. Diesel buyers alone also have the £1,500 option of a 6-speed automatic gearbox. On to the value proposition all that represents. As usual, for proper comparisons, you'll need to be comparing apples with apples by looking at Super Mini rather than family hatchback-based crossover models. In other words, if it makes more sense, cars in the Nissan Juke segment rather than the Nissan Qashqai class. Do that and it quickly becomes clear that yes, Kia can still do strong value. A good example of this is the entry-level petrol-powered Start trimmed version, which at under £13,000 looks like a lot of car for the money. All the small petrol-powered crossover rivals priced within touching distance of this variant, say a decently spec'd Dacia Duster 1.6 for a little less, a Renault Captur 0.9 TCE for the same kind of money, or a Peugeot 2008 crossover 1.2 VTI for a little more. All of those require you to pay a chunk more for the air conditioning that most buyers want these days. A basic 1.6 litre Nissan Juke gets a properly cooled cabin as standard, but that's a smaller, less flexible car that'll cost you around £1,000 more. The bulk of potential Soul buyers in this country, though, will be looking beyond the entry-level point, probably at the mainstream Connect trimmed models that around 65% of them choose. That's what I've got here. If petrol-powered, these will be priced in the £15,000 to £16,000 bracket. If diesel-powered, like this one, then you'd be looking in the £16,500 to £17,500 bracket. Now, for that kind of money, there are, of course, quite a number of other small crossover options, say Ford's EcoSport or a turbocharged Nissan Juke. Given that both are less practical than this Kia, you might be more tempted to spend the same kind of cash on a rival like a 1.6 litre Peugeot 2008 crossover, or maybe even on base versions of compact crossovers sized closer to the bigger Qashqai-sized crossover class, cars like Suzuki's SX4 S-Cross and Mitsubishi's ASX. Interestingly though, none of the competitors I've just mentioned can rival this Kia's seats down luggage capacity or beat its standard equipment tally and comprehensive warranty. Other compact crossover models that try and straddle the gap between something Duke-shaped and something Qashqai sized will all in rough terms cost you £2,000 to £3,000 more once you start comparing like-for-like engines and spec against this Soul. Here I'm talking of cars like Vauxhall's Mocha, Skoda's Yeti, Mini's Countryman and Jeep's Renegade. So let's assume you've been through the comparison process and decided upon this Kia. What can you expect to find fitted for your money? Well, whichever of the two 1.6 litre engines you opt for, 130 brake horsepower GDI petrol or 126 brake horsepower CRDI diesel, you should find a decent level of standard equipment, including daytime running lights, air conditioning, Kia's flex steer system to alter the weight of steering response, a trip computer, all-round electric windows and powered mirrors, remote central locking and hill start assist control to keep you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. Happily, unlike many new cars these days, there's a space-saver spare wheel as opposed to one of those fiddly puncture repair kits. And you also get a decent quality 6-speaker audio system with DAB radio plus audio controls on the steering wheel, albeit with the irritation that a conventional CD player isn't included. Kia thinks that as USB and AUX imports are provided, such a thing will no longer be needed. Well, call me a Luddite, but I think that's an oversight. Am I really the only one who still listens to compact discs? There still seem to be plenty in the stores the last time I looked. Most customers will be considering this car at mid-range Connect level, which is what you'll need to get the extra items most will want. Things like the proper colour TFT infotainment screen for the cabin, 17-inch alloy wheels and Bluetooth for your phone. At this level you also get front fog lights, cruise control with a speed limiter and a reverse parking camera. Further up the range there are niceties like an Infinity premium sound system with an external amp and subwoofer, 8-inch touchscreen satellite navigation with European mapping, auto headlamps and front speaker mood lights. As for customization options, well, it's a bit disappointing to find that there aren't as many of these available here as Kia offers in other markets, but as before, you can optionally specify different roof colours and wheel choices to make your car stand out. Whichever Soul model you choose, safety-wise there are 6 airbags, anti-whiplash head restraints, Isofix child seat mountings and the usual electronic assistance for braking, traction and stability control. To hopefully ensure that none of this will be needed, there's the usual electronic assistance. You get tyre pressure monitoring plus an ABS braking system featuring EBD electronic brake force distribution to make it more effective, plus a BAS brake assist feature to help an emergency stop sabotage to following motorists by automatically activating ESS emergency stop signalling. There's also Kia's VSM vehicle stability management system, which can stabilise the car if one side of it has more traction than the other, say if there's ice, standing water or wet leaves at the side of the road. Options include a park assist system that can help with both parallel and perpendicular parking. Plus there's a high beam assist setup that can dip your lights for you in the face of oncoming traffic at night, and a lane departure warning system to stop dozy drivers from veering out of their lanes on the highway. You can't have an engine smaller than 1.6 litres in size with this Soul, which is quite large by the standards of the Super Mini based crossover class. On top of that, the extra weight of this second generation model means that fuel and CO2 returns have fallen by a few percentage points over those of the original model. Disappointingly, there's no engine stop and start system either. Having said all of that, I think most owners will probably still be quite happy with the readings this car does manage. In the case of the petrol variant, that means 41.5 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 158 grams per kilometre of CO2. Though bear in mind, that's with the standard 16 or 17-inch wheels fitted. If you decide to bling your car up with the optional 18 inches, then those figures will fall a little to 38.7 miles to the gallon and 170 grams per kilometre. Often in these reviews, I question whether it's really worth finding the extra premium over petrol power to get yourself a diesel. Here though, I reckon it definitely is. The 1.6 litre CRDI variant not only feels a good deal more rapid than its green pump stablemate, but is also about 50% more efficient, managing 56.5 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 132 grams per kilometre of CO2. Now that's hardly standout in this segment, but many of the rivals that can better this showing offer less performance to go along with their more frugal figures. It is worth pointing out though that if you order your diesel Soul with an automatic gearbox, efficiency takes quite a hit, the figures falling to 47.1 miles to the gallon and 158 grams per kilometre of CO2. The least expensive way to run a Soul though is to opt for the EV all-electric version with its zero tailpipe emissions. This model has been chosen as the company's first global EV because it's an urban-orientated car and because its boxy dimensions make it easier to hide the bulkier aspects of the electric drivetrain. This uses a 27 kilowatt lithium-ion battery that should give you somewhere between 80 and 100 miles of real-world driving on a full charge. These figures are aided by specially engineered super low rolling resistance tyres that offer 10% less resistance than standard low rolling resistance rubber, this further helping to further improve the range. In the front grille are a couple of charging points, one standard and one fast charge port. From a standard 240 volt domestic supply, this Soul EV will take about 5 hours to recharge, while a rapid charge will juice a flat battery to 80% capacity in around 25 minutes. But nearly all potential Soul buyers will be looking at the more affordable petrol and diesel versions. With these, insurance groupings range between groups 9 and 11. And maintenance for the GDI and CRDI variants? Well, it should be affordable thanks to Kia's optional Care 3 and Care 3 Plus packages that cover you for inflation-proof programs. As for service intervals, well, the previously unremarkable 12,500 mile or 12-month interval for the diesel has been extended to a much more acceptable 20,000 mile or 12-month span. But petrol variants still have to visit the garage every 10,000 miles. And residuals? Well, they're certainly helped by the way that this car's class-leading 7-year, 100,000 mile warranty, with unlimited mileage in years 1 to 3, is transferable onto subsequent owners and suggests that you should get around 35% of your purchase price back after a typical 3-year or 36,000 mile ownership term. Get your spec choice right and you might even do a bit better than that. Go too far with the lifestyle bling though and buyers will tend to stay away. There's also a 5-year paint warranty, a 12-year anti-perforation warranty and a year of Europe-wide roadside assistance included. As with all small crossover models of this kind, the idea here is to bring the more palatable elements of SUV 4x4 design to a front-wheel drive super mini-sized vehicle. And it's something Kia has been doing longer than almost all its rivals. Indeed, the original version of this Soul brought the brand's dealerships a new experience, a model that had potential buyers scanning the colour, trim and accessory options before they checked the price. It was a design people viewed very differently, and it still remains the most characterful car the company makes. This second generation version, though, has moved on, now a lot more sophisticated and much easier to live with. Though that look may be similar, the previously slightly self-consciously funky demeanour now appears to have matured into something a great deal more confident. And much else about this Soul is also different. The classier cabin, the extra practicality, the more involving driving experience and the greater refinement are all welcome improvements that'll be crucial in enabling this car to maintain market share against an ever-increasing army of tough rivals in the small crossover sector. It's not for everyone, of course. It isn't supposed to be. Some will see its quasi-military SUV-style looks as cutting edge and right up their street. Others simply won't get it. Most important, though, is the way that the Soul has established Kia as a far cooler brand, and it's hard to put a price on that. If you're looking for a small but practical car with a big personality, then try one. Who knows, you may well agree that you gotta have soul.